April 16th, 1945. A frozen, wind-whipped field outside Koblenz, Germany. 17-year-old Marlies Kappel, trembling and bleeding from a jagged shrapnel wound in her thigh, crawled through ankle-deep mud. The smell of wet earth and gunpowder stung her nose. A sudden roar of approaching boots made her freeze, heart hammering so violently she thought it might burst. 2 American medics appeared from the haze, rifles slung over their shoulders, faces grim. One bent down to lift her, but she spat blood and refused, her small frame shaking uncontrollably. The medic's jaw tightened, his hands gripped her shoulders. She could feel the cold steel of his weapon pressing against her back through the coarse uniform. Death, swift and certain, seemed to linger in the air around them. Marlies's chest heaved. Her fingers, numb and trembling, dug into the mud as if it could anchor her to life. A cough ripped from her throat, wet with blood. The medic's boot scuffed dangerously close, a warning that the choice was not hers. And then, abruptly, she let out a low, guttural sound, not pleading, not crying, just an almost inaudible refusal. The medic froze mid-step. The world held its breath with her. Silence cracked the tension, heavier than the roar of the distant artillery. A single snowflake landed on her cheek, melting instantly against the streak of blood, sparkling like a tiny signal in the gray dawn. The medic's eyes softened ever so slightly, and the rifle lowered a fraction. The field waited, indifferent, for what would come next. Marlies did not move. Her body was rigid, trembling from fever and cold, each shivering a storm of pain in her fractured muscles. The wind bit at exposed skin, carrying the acrid scent of cordite and smoke from nearby shell bursts. Her breath formed clouds in the gray morning as she forced herself to remain on the muddy ground. The medic's hands hovered, unsure whether to lift her or leave her. The second medic knelt beside her, checking the wound, grimacing at the rawness of torn flesh. He moved too quickly. Marlies flinched, pressing her face into the mud. The smell of wet earth and blood was suffocating. Each heartbeat felt like it might tear her chest open. Footsteps crunched behind them. Another soldier appeared, rifle trained, eyes cold. The power imbalance was absolute. Any wrong move, and it could end in instant death. Marlies could feel her body weaken further. Hunger and exhaustion gnawed at her ribs. Her hands scraped through mud, seeking purchase, anything to ground herself. The first medic exhaled sharply. He crouched, fingers brushing the shrapnel wound lightly, almost hesitant. The sudden intimacy of his touch made Marlies flinch, but the expected strike never came. Instead, he placed a folded coat over her shoulders, warmth seeping through the soaked fabric. The snow continued to fall, silent now, muffling distant artillery. Her lungs burned. Her legs refused to obey. And then, as if the moment had been suspended in time, a distant artillery shell landed, shattering the world around them. The medic flinched, but his hand stayed steady. The second medic tightened his grip on her arm, lifting just slightly, not forcing, just offering. A silence followed the explosion, broken only by her ragged breathing and the whisper of falling snow. The mud clung to her like a second skin. Marlies' leg throbbed violently, sending shocks of pain up her spine. Each breath was a rasping struggle. A flare of smoke drifted across the field, carrying the sharp metallic scent of blood. The wind gusted, tearing at the coat the medic had draped over her, leaving her shivering under its damp weight. An officer appeared suddenly, pistol drawn, eyes sharp and unforgiving. Absolute authority radiated from him. Marlies' heart leaped violently. She tried to curl inward, but pain pinned her to the ground. The pistol's cold barrel gleamed in the dim light. Every instinct screamed that the end had come. Her ears rang with the faint crack of gunfire in the distance, each shot echoing a threat closer than the last. The medic froze, knuckles white around her arm. Another gust of wind carried the stench of cordite and mud. Marlies' teeth chattered. Her body shook uncontrollably, fever burning beneath pale skin. The officer raised his hand. The weapon glinted. Marlies' mind filled with impossible calculations. There was no escape. Then, unexpectedly, the officer's gaze lingered on the small coat wrapped around her shoulders. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he lowered the pistol. The tension broke in a breathless pause. Marlies could feel her legs weaken further, her body trembling as the realization of survival pierced through terror. The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion. Only the wind whispered across the frozen field. The medic pressed a small piece of chocolate into her hand, its bitter sweetness grounding her in reality, a small lifeline in the chaos. For a moment, the world stopped. Then a distant shout carried across the field, and the danger returned, closer than before. Marlies' fingers closed around the chocolate, sticky with mud and blood. Her teeth broke it slowly, savoring warmth she hadn't felt in hours. The medic adjusted the coat around her shoulders again, tucking it beneath her chin. Each movement was deliberate, gentle, a refusal to rush, a quiet defiance of the violence surrounding them. The wind had died down, leaving only the faint creak of splintered wood from a distant barn. Her thigh burned where the shrapnel lodged, pulses of agony radiating through her hip. She shivered, teeth rattling. The medic knelt, brushing mud from her face with a trembling hand, anchoring her to life with that simple gesture. No words, no promises, just touch. The officer lingered nearby, his weapon lowered, but his presence was absolute. For a heartbeat, it seemed as if the human heart could pierce through the armor of war. He gestured vaguely toward the medics and stepped back, giving them space to act. Marlies' chest rose and fell in uneven gasps, and she felt tears freezing on her cheeks. The second medic pressed a bandage around her wound, careful, precise, though his hands shook from exhaustion. Every movement was slow, measured. This small act of care was monumental. Her world, once poised on the edge of death, began to recalibrate. The field, still littered with mud and smoke, now smelled faintly of warmth and chocolate, a fragile tether to survival. Silence settled, profound and heavy, broken only by the distant drip of melting snow from shattered trees. Marlies' eyes fluttered closed for a moment, letting the stillness fill the spaces where fear had screamed. For the first time in what felt like days, she did not tremble from terror alone. Then, a sudden groan of a nearby soldier reminded her the war was not paused. Danger lingered, patient and unyielding. Weeks later, Marlies sat on a wooden cot in a makeshift field hospital outside Koblenz. Her thigh was bandaged, bruised skin mottled with purple and yellow. The cold still crept through the thin blankets, but each shiver was now tempered by a strange, fragile safety. The smell of antiseptic and drying blood mingled with the faint aroma of stale bread. The medic, Sergeant Halverson, entered quietly, carrying a tin cup of lukewarm soup. He placed it beside her, then held her hand as she brought it to her lips. Each sip grounded her, nourishing not just her body but her fractured spirit. She felt the tremors of exhaustion fade slightly, replaced by a muted, wary gratitude. Outside, the wind rattled the canvas walls of the hospital tent. Artillery was still audible miles away, but within this small room, care had triumphed over fear. Halverson brushed a lock of wet hair from her face, and she caught the faint scent of tobacco and leather on his sleeve. The gesture was small, almost trivial, yet it carried the weight of an unspoken promise. Life could persist, even here. Days bled into nights. The snow melted, leaving behind patches of mud and the persistent smell of wet earth. Marlies and Halverson never spoke of the frozen field or the officer whose unexpected mercy had saved her. They didn't need to. The coat, now patched and frayed, remained draped across her shoulders, a silent talisman of survival. It was proof of humanity amidst chaos. And yet, every time she touched it, she felt the raw terror of that morning, the fear, the numbness, the fragility of life, and the profound shift brought by a single unforced act. The world outside still burned with war, but within the quiet gestures, a fragile bond had been forged. Decades later, Marlies stood alone at a small cemetery outside Munich. Spring rain darkened the soil. The war had been over longer than it had ever existed, yet her hands still trembled as she opened the worn canvas bag she had carried across half a lifetime. Inside lay the coat, frayed at the cuffs, repaired twice at the seams, still faintly smelling of smoke, antiseptic, and wet earth. She had kept it folded for years, untouched, as if disturbing it might wake something that had never fully slept. She knelt before a modest grave. No rank, no decoration, only a name, dates, and a unit number worn nearly smooth.
Marlies laid the coat across the stone and smoothed it carefully, the same way it had once been smoothed over her shoulders in the mud. Her fingers pressed into the fabric. Memory surged back. Not the pain, not the terror, only the moment after. The moment she refused to move. The moment someone noticed. Birds stirred in the trees. Life continued, indifferent. From her pocket she removed a yellowed scrap of paper, folded so many times the creases felt soft as cloth. She slid it beneath the coat and weighed it down with a stone. 5 words, written in careful English. I stayed because you did. She rose slowly and walked away. The following spring, the groundskeeper noticed something strange. The coat was gone. No disturbed soil, no sign of theft, only the faint impression where fabric had rested. And every year after that, without fail, someone left a new one, always folded, always clean, always silent. No one ever saw who brought them. Only the ground seemed to remember the girl who refused to move, and the quiet choice that stopped everything cold.